Shouldn't he be playing basketball?
Stick to basketball.
Do they even have ice in China?
Women's hockey is just boring, okay?
Who wants to watch girls play?
Go back to where you belong.
Go back where we belong? This is where we belong.
For Canadian small businesses, this has been a year like no other.
We went from having this thriving business and suddenly it just stopped.
But you've been resilient and adapted to a changing world.
The only way that we can fight this is by being our best selves.
You even continued to give back. Now more than ever, Canada, let's show our support and shop local.
From customers to employees, see how we create extraordinary experiences for the people who matter most to your company.
Diversity and inclusion is the opportunity to learn together, but more importantly, to learn from each other.
Hi, everyone. Happy New Year, and thank you for joining our first event of 2022. My name is Sophia Drolia, and I'm the board's Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Employee Engagement. Welcome to today's webcast, the second in the board's new series on diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. I want to start this session by acknowledging that many of us are on the traditional territory of many nations across Turtle Island. We broadcast from Toronto, the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, that is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. As we talk today about building more inclusive workplaces, reconciliation must be an element of that discussion. Now, I'd like to quickly make some housekeeping notes. Today's webcast is presented by RBC Royal Bank, and this entire event series is supported by SNC-Lavalin and Accenture. These amazing partners enable the board to do what we do, along with our principal sponsors, the Globe and Mail, Scotiabank, and the University of Toronto. As well, this webcast is being recorded, and you can watch it or other sessions at supportbusiness.bot.com under webinars and videos. Now, if your video is lagging today, you can select click here to switch stream to view at a lower bandwidth. And for any other technical issues, click request help in the bottom right corner. And finally, to ask our awesome panelists any questions today at any point, you can do so through the Q&A feature to the right of your screen. With that, let's begin today's event. As we all know, a giant spotlight has been put on equity, diversity, and inclusion, thanks to global movements drawing attention to these issues. More and more people are asking who is in the room, who has a voice, and who doesn't. That includes in the workplace. Our first session in this series was all about how organizations can recruit diverse talent, especially in a region like Toronto, where our workplaces should more closely match our varied demographics and communities. But getting people to apply is just one part of the equation when growing diverse talent pools. Once a candidate gets through the door, we want them to stay, and that's easier said than done. For newly hired talent to put down roots, they need to feel like they belong, like they have a future at the organization, one where they'll be valued, heard, and respected. For workers from equity-deserving communities, that can be particularly rare. And if the organization hasn't taken steps to create a positive, inclusive, and most importantly, accountable work environment where everyone feels welcome, talent, unfortunately, will leave. From the organization's perspective, there's a real cost to this, not just in the time it takes to replace these individuals, but morale and reputation also take a hit. Yet retention isn't just about preventing losses. It's about what can be gained by creating an atmosphere where people can bring their full selves to work, which helps with productivity, loyalty, employee engagement, and most of all, it's the right thing to do for our teams. Now, if you're watching right now, I know you agree, as does the presenting sponsor of this webcast, RBC Royal Bank. With a message to us from RBC is the Vice President of Commercial Financial Services Business Markets in the Greater Toronto Region, Eric Turner. Let's play this message, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Turner, and I'm the Vice President of Business Markets in Greater Toronto. I'm honored to be here with you today and ready to talk about one of the most important topics of our day, diversity. This year, RBC ranked as the second most diverse and inclusive companies in the world. For us, diversity and inclusion is a core value. We take great pride in knowing that our organization is built by employees who have a diversity of backgrounds, experiences, and walks of life. Most importantly, we live and breathe a culture that is welcoming to all. That is why today we are thrilled to be the lead sponsor of the Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Belonging series. Last summer, we announced actions to address the inequity and systemic bias that have disadvantaged many groups in our communities for far too long. As part of this plan, we've committed 40% of our summer opportunities to BIPOC youth and are investing $50 million in areas like skills development through RBC Future Launch. We're strong believers that diversity can help us achieve our greatest potential, and we want the leaders of tomorrow to have equal opportunities today. Thank you, Toronto Board of Trade, for helping bring this important conversation to life. Enjoy the session. Bye for now.
Thank you, Eric, for that message, and for RBC for working so closely with us on this series. It's clearly a priority for all of us, as it should be going into the new year. Fortunately, we have some great experts to help us reach our inclusion and belonging goals. So joining us today, also from RBC, is Gopal Bansal, the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion. Under his leadership, RBC has been recognized as one of the top global companies for diversity and inclusion in rankings, including the Refinitiv D&I Index and the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. Also with us is Victoria Jones, Global Vice President of Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion at SNC-Lavalin. Victoria is a seasoned HR professional, using her vast expertise to weave diversity and inclusion values into everything SNC does as an organization. And finally, rounding out our panel is Anne-Marie Pham, Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. Anne-Marie has worked with diverse communities and workplaces for over 20 years, and in 2013, she received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Award for her community service. Thank you all for being here and welcome, and let's jump right into the questions. And as a reminder to our audience, you can submit your own questions to the right. So I'll start with Victoria. Let's start by talking about culture. It's a big piece of workforce management, but it can mean so many things to different people. What does workplace culture mean to you?
Thanks, Sophia, and hi, everyone. I think the culture question is a really important question to start off our conversation today. And I think most people who've perhaps dialed into this session, we've all got ED&I programs or strategies, but the inclusive culture piece is the challenge for everyone. How do you truly get to a point where everyone feels part of that organisation, feels like they belong? So for me, there's two elements to this. I think there's what I would class more as the organisational culture. And I think that's the big picture. Why are we all here in the organisation? What's our purpose? What are our core values? But actually, the workplace culture is the really important part. So I was head of recruitment for many years. And what I always tried to look at was from a candidate perspective, which was obviously the first webinar that you hosted. What's it going to feel like for people when they get there? You know, we can all have different, you know, sort of external, you know, culture and what do people think the organisation's like. But the workplace culture is created by people. It's created by the environment that they work in. So for me, that's more about the personality of the organisation, that me as someone joining an organisation is going to feel when I get there. What am I going to experience? You know, is my environment a safe environment? Is it, and I mean that from, you know, both a sort of physical safety, but also that psychological safety, because that's what's really important to people. And I think for me, that workplace culture is the important element, the really important element. And I think it's, you know, like I said, that's the experience, and that's what people are going to take away from that organisation. That's what people is going to keep people in that organisation. And that's the bit for me, that it's about the people. You know, they create that workplace culture. It's that personality, and it can differ. You know, we've got many offices all over the world, and I think that workplace culture element is quite specific in locations as well. And I think it must be, and that's what's important. So that's what workplace culture means to me.
Amazing, thank you. And I love that. It's about the people. So Gopal, I'm going to ask you to build on that and really talk about the people. How do we get people to really buy into this workplace culture and contribute to the workplace culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Victoria covered a fair amount of this, and I would agree. I think there's two elements to this as well. When you're thinking about people, leaders certainly set a tone for culture, and that's really important. So we have a heavy focus on inclusive leadership and making sure that our leaders are aware of how they show up and the dynamics that they create, but also the accountability that they have. And how they set the tone for you know, others on their teams to continue to build that culture. You know, and we really do lean into our purpose in the same way that Victoria talked about. You know, our purpose of helping clients thrive and communities prosper, and that really being a purpose-driven organization helps to set that tone from the leadership. But the interaction between people, I think, is something that it's easily overlooked, and it's so critical. The way that we, you know, everybody at RBC is responsible for RBC's culture. Everyone at RBC is responsible for creating that inclusive culture. You know, if we have somebody on a team who doesn't have any direct reports as an individual contributor, for example, but you know, they tend to not invite other people to coffee, or you know, that has an impact on our culture, and that's really important. I think there is a tendency we look up for the tone from the top, forgetting the impact that we have, every one of us as individuals in the places that we work, and how we build that culture, how we think about others around us, how we demonstrate empathy and compassion in understanding, you know, what was the impact of the murder of George Floyd? You know, were we reaching out? Were we being empathetic to Black colleagues or not? Those are the aspects that we really lean into, and we do that through training, and we do that through other learning and development opportunities, but also the tone from the top. So the two need to work together.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, you know, it's all about the people, the tone from the top, like the leadership has to really create that inclusive culture, but it's also the people, right? Like as Victoria said, it's all about the people, the interactions between individuals. And so to follow up, Anne-Marie, I'm going to ask you this. How do we expand on that culture of belonging so that diverse talent want to just not apply to the organization? So exactly what Victoria is saying, you know, that candidate experience, right? So, you know, that they want to apply, but they want to stay and they want to grow within that.
This is such a great question, and I really appreciate the comments so far from Victoria and Gopal. So thank you for that. Listen, there are so many things that we can talk about when it comes to helping people to stay in an organization and see themselves expanding their career in the organization. I'm going to start off by a very simple thing, but one that is so important, is representation matters. And so if you want employees to stay in an organization, we need to ask ourselves, is there diversity at all levels of the organizations, in all functions, in all departments? And a lot of workplaces across Canada have less and less diversity the higher you go up in an organization. And so how are we doing in our own organization when it comes to representation at all levels? And is it possible for us to show employees the path that it has been done before, and that the leaders who are at the top, who have made some progress on their career path, what are their stories, right? What has worked for them? What are some of the barriers that they encountered? What are some of the systems, policies, and practices perhaps that have been reviewed through a diversity and equity lens to ensure that, in fact, the organization has cleared some of the boulders on the road to advancement, right? And that while it's not a perfect path, that perhaps it's a little bit more smooth for other individuals. So I think representation matters. And I think that sharing the stories of inclusion, sharing the stories of advancement, and giving people inspiration and hope that they can do it too also matters. I also want to expand on what Gopal you shared about inclusive leadership, because I think that, first of all, I really agree with that. And I think that we need to do a lot of conversations around the fact that, yes, there are roles that leaders have to take to be more accountable for diversity and keeping the diverse talent in the workplace. And we need to practice those skill sets, you know, the ability to be courageous, the ability to be vulnerable, and understanding that being vulnerable is still a trait of an inclusive leader. The ability to be willing to admit your own mistakes, unlearn and unpack some of the biases that one may have, and really try to model inclusive behavior so that it penetrates all areas of the organization. Those two aspects, I think, are really important for us to help individuals see themselves and want to stay in an organization.
I think that's fantastic, Anne-Marie. You know, what I really liked was that storytelling piece, right? Because storytelling allows us to connect to each other, and you know, the storytelling about inclusion and how people advanced and their journeys allow people to sort of see themselves and creating that pipeline. And I like that, like really showing employees that you know, these are the opportunities that are available to you. And I think, you know, Gopal, you mentioned this earlier, is really about development, people development, leadership development, and really making sure that that's in place so that there is a journey that's available for all staff when they join the organization. I'm gonna shift a little bit to talk about, you know, the world that we're in today. It's still a very remote world. And, you know, as most organizations, we're still working remotely. And so, you know, back to this culture of belonging, you know, Gopal, what are some strategies that you're seeing for fostering a culture of belonging in the virtual workplace? Do you have any examples that come to mind? Actually, you know what, let's start with that piece, and then I might ask Anne-Marie for examples after.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question, Sophia. I think we have a bit of a unique situation at RBC where we still do have a lot of people who are on premises. You know, we have a large part of our population that is still in branches, serving clients, you know, providing that advice, providing that much needed counsel to clients as they come in. And so, and we do have a population of our workforce that is working remotely. And so, you know, we are trying to be very cognizant of the experiences of both. And how we continue to think about this experience of belonging for both of those folks who are in the branches and working, or in our offices, as well as those who are working remotely. The one thing I think that's been really interesting for us is when we think about those who have been working remotely, what we have found is that this sort of remote working has democratized the experience as we think about our global workforce. So our colleagues who are international, who would typically call into meetings, and we would be in person in Toronto, for example. Now everyone's on the same field, right? You don't have 2 or 3 people on a web call and the rest of the people in the room, and you've got this interesting difference in experiences. But now everyone has that same experience. So that's been really interesting and something that we've used to learn from. Even as we think about the hybrid future that we expect we're going to be going into, we're thinking about how do we ensure that we continue to be aware of the experiences of those people who are working remotely, whether they are working remotely during the day or some days a week or whatever the case may be, whatever their structure is. But we are thinking about how we engage them, how do we create that sense of belonging for them, and we're doing it through a number of ways. We have a number of events that we host throughout the year. We have gone to a virtual environment for those events. It opens up the aperture. It allows us to invite more people. It helps us keep our costs low, and it helps us to continue to have more engaging dialogue and create a consistent experience for everybody. But we're also, are aware that we have to help people overcome, certain biases that may show up. Proximity bias, for example, where you think about only the people who are around you. And making sure that people are aware of those biases and how they can overcome them. And so we've held a number of webinars to ensure people are able to come in and learn and understand what biases may creep in intentionally or unintentionally, so that they can continue to focus on fostering this sense of inclusion and belonging. But I think the other aspect of this is being aware of the importance of just reaching out and understanding that everybody's experience is going to be very, very different. Recognizing that not everybody is going to be able to be on camera all the time, and that's okay when you're in a remote environment. You need to give people the opportunity to just say, today's not a camera day for me, for whatever reason it may be. As you said, in Ontario, many of us have remote working or kids at home who are parents, kids at home who are learning remotely, and that's a different kind of distraction. Kids may show up and pop into screens. I'm expecting one of mine will do that soon. But then you also have others who maybe are living by themselves, and that's a whole different sort of sense that we need to be aware of. And understanding, if you are isolated, you are by yourself, how do we connect with you? How are we deliberate about making sure that there's somebody on the other end of this virtual screen who cares about you and who wants to make sure that you feel included and belong, even though your situation is different.
Yeah, I think you that's really key, right? Understanding that while we're all remote, we're all on screen, those that are interacting virtually, but the experiences are not necessarily the same, right? And understanding that those experiences will vary, and appreciating those experiences and allowing for those experiences, right? Because that's where you really allow people to be authentic, even on a screen. Like you said, I also expect my kids to come in, and it's just going to happen, right? As part of the past 2 years, and we've sort of come to this environment where we understand interruptions will happen, and we've become more empathetic. I think that's the piece that you talked about earlier, Gopal, was that empathy piece, which is really, really important in creating that sense of culture of belonging. Anne-Marie, do you have any examples of organizations, that are doing remote culture of belonging really well, or approaches that are working?
Yeah, absolutely. As we work with more and more organizations in the last couple of years, since the beginning of the pandemic, and they have reached out to us asking for support, we see that oftentimes the concern at the very beginning was, how do I do this, right? I don't see my staff in person anymore, and I'm not exactly sure how to navigate these difficult situations, especially when my workforce is all over Canada. And so the first thing that we would recommend is say, do not assume that no news is good news, because before that's sort of like the assumption. If you don't have a problem, you don't share it with us, then we assume that you're okay. Well, actually, we need to now, as employers, be very proactive. And so it's about checking in with each person in our organization and asking them, how are you and how can I support you? It's about being flexible in the approaches that we use to support our employees. And certainly, following the murder of George Floyd, following the discoveries of Indigenous graves, following the killing of the Muslim family that was run down by a car, following, the rise of anti-Asian racism, organizations have come up to us and said, what can we do? And so we developed a lot of resource guides at the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusions. We organized webinars, and we really encouraged people to listen in, to learn, and to have conversations in a safe space, but also in a brave and courageous space. And sometimes we went into workplaces as well to facilitate listening circles. And in those listening circles, the leaders of organizations were actually invited to not say anything and really listen to the concerns, the issues, and the impact that the employees wanted to share with them. And so it's really a time for opening our hearts and our minds to the well-being of employees. And because we don't see them physically, we want to be there, in spirit with them and listening in, and then coming up with strategies that's really going to help them. And part and parcel of that is making sure that your organization has the people and the resources in place to accommodate those different needs, and to create programs and initiatives that not only engage employees, but tries to really address the issues that they face.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. That was a fantastic summary, and actually a really good segue into my next question, because you really focused on listening to employees, and the piece about like not allowing leadership to talk and really just listen and absorb, and opening the minds and the hearts. And so that's obviously a key piece in creating that culture. So I'm going to shift to Victoria and talk a bit about this listening and feedback piece. So we know listening and feedback are so important to cultivating a sense of belonging. So how can organizations ensure that their diverse workers are being heard, and that their perspectives are not only heard, but acted upon?
Thanks, Sophia. So the key for this, I think, for SNC-Lavalin particularly is co-creation. And I think that's the combination of all of this, isn't it? It's the listening, it's the feedback. And at the end of last year, we launched our new global ED&I programme. And our intention now moving forward is to co-create local action plans. So it's really important that we have that global overall programme, because that sets out the approach, the strategic pillars. But actually what's really important is that local co-creation. So what we're intending to do, and we've done this in some of our other regions around the world, is we do actually bring a partner in, so somebody like CCDI, and to work with us to actually really, truly engage with our employees. So that can be done in many different ways. It can be through focus groups. It can be through digital engagement, through some type of survey, through listening sessions, interviews with the leadership community as well. And most importantly, and one we haven't touched on, is our employee resource groups. They are such a vital element of being able to listen to those underrepresented communities and actually get to a point where we co-create action plans based on what people are experiencing, not what we think they're experiencing. And that's what's the important part. Let's solve the problems that truly exist, and let's get to the root cause of those problems, so that we can come up with the most appropriate solutions that is going to provide change and long-term sustainable change, not just sort of, short-term interventions that I think sometimes can happen if you don't engage thoroughly. And where we've seen that happen around the world, it's had some really positive impact, because people feel part of it then. They don't feel like a strategy or a program has been launched and they don't understand the why, because the why element is important for people to engage in. If we go back to the original question around culture, everybody, Gopal said it, everybody is part of creating that culture. So if we have programs and action plans that people don't understand, well, why have you chose those actions? Why are you addressing those problems? If it's based on what people have told you, what you've listened to, and I think bringing in a partner is important as well, because you do provide that real safe space for people to be truly honest and share with them the barriers that exist. You know, you can't have inclusion if it doesn't run through everything you do as well. So the employee experience is vitally important, and it's the whole end-to-end employee lifecycle experience. So, you know, what are people feeling all the way through their journey within an organization? And you can only get that if you stop and you listen and you engage properly. And that takes time. So sometimes these things, they do take time, but if you're going to do them properly. And I would say that's something that we've truly learnt from, and we're now intending to do that across all of our regions. So that's part of my priority for the year ahead. But I would recommend that to anyone, because it really does make a difference, and everybody gets behind the actions then, and everybody will help you make long-term sustainable change, which is what we're all striving for.
That's incredible. I love that, and I love that it's across. It's being done globally, and you're right. Like it's all about stopping, listening, and engaging. Those are the real key pieces. And Gopal, how does RBC do that? Because you know, nationally, and then you have branches, you have a corporate. How does it work in that environment where you're trying to listen and act on employee feedback, especially diverse employee feedback?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to, you know, the strategies and the tactics that Victoria talked about. You know, we if I go back to May of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, you know, the first thing we did was activate listening sessions with Black colleagues across the bank, and across the bank. So not just in Canada, not just in the US, but also in the UK and the Caribbean. We opened it up to any Black employees who wanted to participate. And the intent there was very specifically to listen. And to hear what they had to say and what they had to share. We also listened to what our clients were telling us, you know, and at the same time we listened to engaged with community and listened to what the community was telling us. And what was shared is really what helped shape the commitments we made back in July 2020. And, you know, we made a series of commitments back to BIPOC and Black communities specifically. And that was really important. Taking, as Victoria said, you know, the co-creation, understanding what we heard and the feedback that we were getting, and then driving to take the actions and make commitments based on what folks were telling us. Similar, you know, Anne-Marie talked about, you know, the residential school discoveries. We did the same thing. We had held in advance of that listening sessions with Indigenous employees to ensure we understood their experience. But that was an example of where we wanted to provide support to Indigenous colleagues at RBC, but we knew that, you know, we couldn't just bring in Western trained mental health experts for people who, you know, found themselves in a place of crisis or a place of trauma. And so we listened, and we brought in Indigenous healers specifically for Indigenous employees to meet with. And so, you know, this idea of listening and understanding is really critical, and we use a lot of the same tactics. Our employee engagement survey, we have an always-on listening strategy. Our ERGs are really critical in bringing things up from the grassroots in terms of what they hear. You know, we have many of our business units and leaders have diversity leadership councils, and many of them host listening sessions as well with employees within their groups, so that they can understand what they need to do, or what feedback is being shared specifically within their business units or business groups, so they know how to respond and react as well. You know, we provide resources from the center for sure. But that is really important. But it's not just the listening, it's what you do with the listening that's important. You know, listening for the sake of listening is just interesting. Listening for the sake of being able to take action and drive a change and create you know, a different experience for people. That's really that's really the important part of this. And so we always try to connect it. What did we hear and how did we act?
That's amazing. That's that key piece, right? Is the action. And Anne-Marie, I'm going to actually ask you, and this is it's an audience question to build on this one, but it's because you have experience across different organizations and different sized organizations. But how can a small company with limited resources support and engage staff equitably and ensure that they're being heard? You know, in smaller organizations where ERGs might not make sense. how can they, balance and prioritize resources, and ensure that their employees are being heard?
Thank you. And first of all, before I say that, I just want to say kudos to Victoria and Gopal for all the wonderful work that you are doing in your organizations. I think that those are great examples of, progressive employers who are really authentically trying to make a change in the workplace culture, in really valuing, listening, and doing something about what employees are saying. So I think that's really important. But of course, Canada is made up of also a lot of small businesses and small organizations. And oftentimes they don't have the resources to put out, big educational training or listening circles or having employee resource groups. And I think for those smaller organizations, it's really a few things. One is, do you have the pulse of your organization? Do you understand how your people are doing? Right? And it doesn't have to be a very expensive undertaking. It comes from the top. If you're having an all-team meeting and gatherings in different small departments, ask people how they are doing, and whether as an organization, if we wish to commit to diversity, inclusion, and equity, how are we doing as an organization? What are we doing well? What can we do better? And for those individuals who are providing a lot of great input, where you're feeling that they have a level of interest and genuine commitment to wanting to advance the organization, try to find ways to meaningfully engage them. Right? Organizations can have people raise their hand and say, I would like to be part of a team that will, like Victoria said, co-create initiatives that are meaningful and impactful for our organization, right? So you can start organically, you can check in with the people, and then you can create a team of dedicated individuals that will help move your organization forward. Align your corporate vision and mission to diversity and inclusion values and principles, and then look at how diversity and inclusion can be embedded into various aspects of your organization. It could be as simple as reviewing a particular program that you have to see if this program is reaching out to a diverse market. It could be as simple as reviewing your human resource policy and having a little focus group amongst your team and say, hey, is this policy actually working for you? Or are there one or two aspects that we need to improve, right? So you don't need to do everything under the sun, but certainly with the help of a small team, you can start to identify some key areas that you can implement and then build success from there. And what's really important, I think, is transparency and honesty. So as leaders of the organizations, tell people what you're trying to do. Explain to people that although we're not perfect, hopefully, for every step back that we're making, we're having 2 steps forward, right? And engaging people along the journey. So authenticity, we talked about vulnerability, we talked about courage. All of those things are really, really important for organizations, and it does need to be led from the top, but also have the empowerment and the co-creation of the people who really care in the organization.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. That's really key. And our conversation so far has really made me think about, and I believe it's the disability community that really focuses on nothing about us without us. And that seems to really be the key, theme in your organizations, that you're not just building, programs because you think it's the right thing to do. You're actually getting, that co-creation piece is so important. And then leading with transparency, authenticity, honesty, you're going to receive that same sort of feedback. You'll get it back in an honest way, which is really key in creating that culture of belonging. So I do actually have a couple of audience questions that I'd like to move to. One of them is about microaggressions and blind spots. So for those that don't know what microaggressions are, they're indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. For example, a very common one is, where are you from? And this implies that one does not belong and creates this othering experience, and that they must be from somewhere else. So what can organizations do to recognize that moments like these exist daily and create an environment where diverse workers are better protected from these microaggressions? So I'll start with Anne-Marie.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is such a great question. And unfortunately, it's a question that is very relevant in most workplaces in Canada. First of all, I want to say, because some people, the comment is like, it's not so micro. Sometimes it's a macroaggression, right? And so we want to just couch this by saying there are many instances of what we call microaggressions, and some of them can be invalidations, like denying the experience of someone may have. Things like, I don't see gender, I don't see color. It could be a micro insult, little snubs that communicate a covert insulting messages, like what you shared with us, Sophia. Or it could be a macro assault, like actually a conscious or intentional actions that are meant to hurt the intended victim. And so there are different kinds of microaggressions. And while one of them, we might be able to brush it off and be okay afterwards, after we kind of, process it. We have to realize that some individuals experience microaggressions on a regular basis. And while it may feel like a mosquito bite, if you get mosquito bites every day throughout your life, it can lead to an outright, allergic reaction, right? And so two things that I would recommend people to do. One is really educate your workforce on what are microaggressions in the workplace and what are the impacts of microaggressions on individuals. Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean that other people haven't as well. And so it's really about raising our awareness, understanding our blind spots, and really building that empathy and compassion about the impacts of microaggressions in the workplace. And then and use specific examples, so really have a chance for people to share about what they have experienced in this workplace, right? Make it relevant, make it current, make it applicable. And then secondly would be building strategies and skills for people to address microaggressions. And so they have to understand that for every action or lack of action that you have as a result of not dealing with the microaggressions, there is going to be a reaction, right? And so understanding the consequences of doing something or not doing something. And then helping people by creating almost little nudges, right? What you can say, what you can do to address those microaggressions in the workplace. There's no one simple answer, but everybody can build a repertoire of skills and behaviors and languages that they can pull out of their toolkit when the situation arises.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I really appreciate that. And I want to be cognizant of our time. So unfortunately, those are all the questions that we have today. But to wrap up, like what I'm hearing is the importance of co-creation. So to really create this culture of belonging, it's important that once someone comes in, they know that they are seen, they are heard, and that they matter, right? So their experiences matter, and that we're listening to their experiences. And we're not only listening, and I think, Gopal, you said this clearly, was that we're acting on the feedback, that we're creating strategies. And what you said, Anne-Marie, right at the end, right? For every action or inaction, there's a reaction. And so really being proactive in that matter, and understanding the experiences and building on those experiences, and ensuring that we're creating an environment that's full of rich, positive experiences. And when there when these experiences don't exist, we go back and we check in often, and we understand what's happening on the daily and on the weekly. Like we're really creating that where we really create this environment where we understand our employees and our employees understand each other. They're creating these interpersonal relationships. So thank you, Gopal, Victoria, and Anne-Marie, for sharing your insights today and taking our questions. And remember, today's event is part of an ongoing series. Our next two webcasts will explore more on the topic of accountability and talk about what businesses of any size can do to create welcoming and inclusive cultures. As well, the board recently announced the date of our very exciting day-long workforce summit, Tuesday, March 29th, 2022. That's weird to say. I don't think I've said 2022 out loud. We'll be assembling business and thought leaders to make sure that in a global battle for talented, diverse workers, Toronto comes out on top. I know this crowd will want to save the date in your calendars. And registration for all these events and more will be promoted on our social channels and can be found at bot.com/events. And thank you again for watching, and have a wonderful day.